Quintessential Quintuplets, or Gotoba no Hanayome, is a manga series written by Neji Haruba, which at the time of this recording is mere chapters away from being completed. On top of that, Season 2 is on the horizon, so I thought it was the best time to do a full breakdown of what is hands down the best rom-com I have ever read. This is by far my most ambitious project yet. I'm taking inspiration from Low Arc's breakdowns of shows like Teen Titans and Fullmetal Alchemist, as I want to be even-handed and comprehensive. I've talked about this series in the past. I did a brief review when I first caught up with the manga, and I did a series of 6 honest look character breakdowns. But a lot has happened since then, and some of the assumptions I made are now outdated. So this will also serve as an update for all those videos. This video series will be in multiple parts, going over a handful of chapters at a time. This video will handle the first 6 chapters of the manga, which were then adapted into the first 3 episodes of the anime. And this goes without saying, there will be spoilers from all throughout the manga, so I highly recommend you read that first, and then come here to see my thoughts and analysis on it. Now, without further ado, welcome to my quintessential breakdown of Quintessential Quintuplets. One show that looms large over this is How I Met Your Mother. How I Met Your Mother was a primetime sitcom that played on CBS and was one of the biggest shows on television for years. I draw this comparison because it has a similar premise. How I Met Your Mother is told through a framing device where the main character tells stories to his kids explaining everything that happened in the lead up to, well, it's in the title. The inherent mystery was an effective hook. Who is the mother? How did the narrator meet her? These are all relatable questions that got a lot of people invested. But what kept the audience coming back was the dynamic between all its major characters and the hijinks they would get into. Likewise, Quintessential Quintuplets has a framing device in the form of Futuro's wedding. The downside when compared to How I Met Your Mother is that the question is multiple choice instead of an open-ended essay. But Quintuplets plays it to its favor by making the end result a definite, and giving the audience 5 equally beautiful waifus to pick from. Both shows benefit from the framing device by putting the intrigue onto who instead of when. This puts both shows above other rom-coms like Friends, where the only question is will they or won't they, in which there are only 2 possibilities. Quintuplets, like the sitcom it takes similar cues from, uses the framing device to hide what the show is really about. It's really about family. And if nothing else, I will hammer that point home as many times as it comes up in the manga. The mysterious bride is only a hook. The interpersonal relationships of its 6 main characters, how they grow together, push each other forward, and become a unified family is the true meat and potatoes. But that's a rather long road. Granted, as a weekly manga with dense chapters, it's less likely to run out of momentum than a primetime sitcom that's artificially bloated by network executives to wring every last dollar out of it, but enough about CBS's dogmatic oversight. Futuro, as the main character, does have a highly detailed arc to go through. At the beginning, he is stingy, arrogant, and self-serving. We see his stinginess and genius working in tandem in his introduction where he orders the most food for the least amount of money possible. And it's this attitude that puts him at odds with Itsuki Nakano, the first of the quintuplets that we are introduced to. Mangaka Neji Haruba likes to toy with tropes. He initially wanted to subvert the first girl trope in anime by introducing all 5 sisters at once. His editor managed to convince him that that would overload the readers, but they found a good compromise by introducing all of them within the first chapter. Itsuki spends that lunch with Futuro and sees him studying, and this is another aspect of Futuro's personality that will become clear in later arcs. This is abnormal behavior. Even though Itsuki is the most diligent of the quints, she can't imagine a boy eating so little and focusing on studying, especially with a pretty girl sitting right across from him. She decides that this is exactly the kind of person that she wants to have as a tutor, and his response is the most arrogant, asshole-ish thing that he could say. Don't get fat. But per the prevalent theme of karmic destiny, it's right after that Futuro gets a call from his little sister Raiha, saying that their father lined him up with a tutoring job, and he's only given their last name, Nakano. So he assumes that it's just Itsuki Nakano, since she's the only one in his class. So for the sake of his job, which he needs in order to clear his family's debt, he has to apologize. He is too proud to apologize in a way that makes a scene, and because dramatic irony is something Neji likes to play with, that causes him to make more of a scene. Somehow, despite being identical and having canonically the same hair color, Futuro can't tell that these 4 other girls are Itsuki's sisters. Maybe he just didn't pay enough attention to their faces, or maybe he was in denial. And because this is an in-depth analysis, I have to address how weird this is. If all the girls are so much alike that they could fool teachers just by switching accessories, then why couldn't Futaro see some family resemblance before Yotsuba faked that pout? It's a nitpick, but one that leaves my head scratching revisiting these first few chapters. Either way, the next one he meets is Ichika. She acts flirty and implies that Futaro's after Itsuki, which, well, she's not exactly wrong. From this encounter, Futaro drops his test paper, and we're introduced to the ever-helpful Yotsuba. She presents her own 0-point test and, in a roundabout way, asks him to be their tutor. She then follows him around until he thanks her, and there's a lot more going on with this, but that's revealed in a different arc. Next up is Miku, who notices Futaro tailing them home. She threatens to call the cops. She then proves to be a little more perceptive by remembering what he ordered for lunch. Nino is the last to meet him. She also notices he's been tailing them, and she tries getting him to buzz off. Needless to say, coming off as a stalker isn't a good first impression. He manages to slip past them and get Itsuki alone, where he not only apologizes but also reveals that he's been hired as their tutor. We get more about how everyone feels about this revelation, but here's the short version. Ichika is fine but hates school. Nino is completely against it. Miku thinks there's no way he's good enough. Yotsuba is enthusiastic, and Itsuki hates him on principle because he offended her, and with the circumstances appears to only care about the money, which is mostly true here at the start. The second chapter gives him a better look at some of their personality traits. Itsuki is shy, Yotsuba is energetic, Miku is cold, and Ichika is lazy. It's also interesting to note that we get a little insight on Maruo when Futaro calls him up. Money is the key motivating factor for the Uesugis, and money is one problem Maruo Nakano doesn't have. The next thing of note is this bit with Ichika and Yotsuba. Ichika likes to sleep naked, and Yotsuba is secretly way into Futaro for her own reasons, and tries to play it up to get attention. This is way more overt later on, but the seeds of that dynamic are first planted here. As far as Miku goes, there's a lot of distrust. She hates the school they transferred from for reasons that will become clear later, and she instantly suspects Futaro did something with her gym clothes. And the fact that Nino was the one who took it also sets up a fundamental part of their dynamic. Actually, two now that I think about it. Nino and Miku are far more antagonistic towards each other than any other pairing. That much is obvious. But this can also be a hint at Nino's familial nature. They're quintuplets, so naturally they would share their clothes and everything else with no regard for what makes them different, in this case, personal space. Speaking of Nino, she sets herself up as the biggest antagonist to Futaro as well. This is the moment where she drugs him because they don't need a tutor. They absolutely do. What she doesn't want is someone coming into her house trying to change her family.
This house is for us sisters. He doesn't belong here with us.
Also, I love the theory that Yotsuba also took a drink, and that's why she's passed out as well. Itsuki's arc also starts at this moment. She's the one who takes him home, and in these early chapters, she's the one who aligns with Nino the most. But unlike the other characters, there's another force working on her. She really takes a liking to Raiha, and more importantly, to Raiha's cooking. Raiha does what Futaro could have done from the outset. Itsuki isn't as malicious as Nino, but she is more sensitive. Had Futaro been nice, she would have accepted his help right away. Instead, she has to convince herself to study and do well so that Futaro can help Raiha. This takes us to the other starting line. The conflict with Futaro is twofold. He has to improve their grades to keep his job and help his family, but to improve their grades, he has to earn their respect and help them grow, not just as students, but as people.
We won't be able to determine if he's right for us based on our exam scores alone.
And as he helps them with their personal hang-ups and grievances, this growth is reflected in their grades.
That's the primary metric I've chosen.
For a long time, Miku was the fan-favorite girl of the manga, and the third and fourth chapters of the manga are why. She is the first of the Quints to go through her initial arc and warm up to Futaro, and what a compelling arc it is. It starts with Futaro confronting the girls before school. He presents himself as a harmless teacher, just seeing if they reviewed the pretest he gave them. Pretest where they got a combined 100 points. He asks a simple history question from the test, and none of them say the answer, with Itsuki being especially embarrassed as the most studious of the Quints. Also note that in this moment, the art makes a very blatant metaphor for the distance between Futaro and their hearts, which is so much cooler when you notice that Yotsuba is physically the closest to him in this shot. But that distance is made clear when Futaro sees that Miku actually did get that question right on the pretest, and for whatever reason, didn't answer. The following scene establishes several dynamics right in the middle of Futaro trying to find out Miku's deal. The first is another hint that Yotsuba is already into Futaro. The second is establishing Ichika's arc, which I will touch on later. The third is Futaro's own view on romance. It's triggered by Ichika's comments about spending their youth falling in love. Futaro believes that romance is a waste of time for students, who should be singularly focused on academic progress. If Ichika and the other girls studied like him, they wouldn't need him, so goes the logic. After hearing that, Yotsuba of course lies and agrees with the sentiment, you can't fall in love if there's no one to fall for. Following that, Miku begins throwing hints to Futaro that she's hiding something important. Something she doesn't want to tell her sisters. Futaro arrives at the reasonable conclusion that Miku is in love with him somehow, and is nervous because he does not feel the same way, and hates the idea of romance. Then he concludes that she must be pulling a prank. So he goes to the rooftop per her instructions and sees what her intentions are. No matter what happens, he can at least use this to get a read on her to improve himself as their tutor. And as it turns out, the feeling she was fighting was her love for history. Yep, she's just a freaking nerd, too ashamed of her interests. Her sisters are all into movies and music and sports and clothes, and she likes Sengoku-era warlords and video games. And she isn't just into it, she's nuts. It's the one thing she has any confidence in, and it's not even enough confidence to share it with her sisters. And just as an aside that I originally wanted to state when I got into the Sister War arc, but with how Chapter 116 played out, I'm putting it here instead. Her confidence and lack thereof in warlords is tied directly into her overall arc in the series. She admires the warlords because they're ambitious, strong, independent, and everything she's not. As the series progresses, you see her confidence and her interests rise parallel her confidence in herself as she takes more and more inspiration from said warlords. And this is Futaro's end. The 100 points combined. Miku knows her history and has a knack for it. All he has to do is prove that he's someone she can learn from, and someone who can get her to help her sisters using her interests. That's the focus of Chapter 4. The first step is humbling himself. She outdoes him in trivia, reaffirming her prior belief that she has nothing to learn from a guy like him. He throws himself into studying, trying to discover every single bit of Sengoku-era trivia he can so he can show Miku how much someone can improve with a little studying. Miku tries fleeing, but Futaro doesn't give up until the girl passes out. Not even a quick disguise works for very long. Then, the moment Miku became everyone's favorite. Yep. That's, real nice. But no, those differing interests convinced her that she was uncool, schlubby, a washout, and a loser. Liking something as nerdy as warlords is just another reason to have no confidence in herself. And it's a long road ahead for that issue. But Futaro shows her the test, shows her that none of them got the same problems right, and if they work together, they can all pass, and maybe, if Miku becomes dependable like that, she will gain as much confidence in herself as she does in her sisters. A major part of the Quints dynamic, especially later on, is good old sibling rivalry. You'd think this would first manifest with the athlete of the family, but it comes from a much more unlikely source. Miku and Nino. This episode starts off with Futaro trying to force his way into their apartment, completely befuddled by the locks on the door, which requires him to ask the girls to let him in. So, good thing he now has two allies within their ranks. Even though Yotsuba is ready to go and Ichika is willing to participate, Nino has other plans. She uses an underhanded tactic and a negative version of what Futaro will have to do later on to address their problems. She knows her sisters better than Futaro, and she uses that against him. With a few quick sentences, she sends Yotsuba and Ichika running to fulfill their duties. Itsuki is already studying on her own, so she doesn't have to worry. This leaves Miku. Miku is the one sister she doesn't fully understand, because Miku has been hiding her true interests all this time, but in trying to goad her, she does end up tapping into another interest that Miku had left woefully undeveloped: cooking. This brings out the mean streak Miku has already had, and a competitive spirit she didn't know she had. That'll serve her well in the future. Problem being, Nino's primary skill and interest is cooking. Miku, well, yeah, no. But Futaro is dirt poor, so he doesn't care. He becomes the first person to ever compliment Miku's cooking, improving her confidence a little bit more, and making her fall for him ever so slightly. With the time wasted, it was the academic loss for Futaro, but an emotional win for all three of them. Then comes one of the dumbest things in the series. All the girls besides Yotsuba are actually cartoonishly blind without contacts or glasses. And this is used in what can only be considered a cringy setup. Futaro forgets his notes, and Miku lets him in before jumping in the bath. Nino mistakes him for Miku despite being, I don't care if all she sees is pitch black. There's no way she's making that mistake. This whole thing results in Itsuki getting a picture of Futaro on top of her because he protected her from some falling books. Oh, and she was wearing nothing but a towel because glad the anime put a good chunk of the budget here. The only real benefit of all of this is it gives Futaro his first insight at Nino's true motives. In her mind, he is an outsider trying to screw up her perfect dream house where her and her sisters can live happily forever. This carries on through the trial. Ichika, being the most neutral and also the oldest, serves as judge. It once again showcases what everyone thinks about him by exploring their bias. Itsuki is against him until she examines the facts. Miku confirms his story up to a certain point, and Nino does everything she can to turn her sisters against him, only to be shut down. Which leads to one of my favorite exchanges between her and Miku.
It's not like there's anything there to look at. Maybe not for you, but I have a figure. We all look the same, genius.
Get it? Miku has so little confidence in herself that she feels unattractive, and because they're quints, that means they're all unattractive. The joke is that her meekness is so unchecked that it loops around to being stupidity. In the end, Futaro proves that he, at the very least, wasn't purposely perving on Nino. The others, especially Itsuki, shouldn't jump to conclusions, and Miku starts realizing she is quick to defend him for reasons she doesn't understand yet. More importantly, Futaro discovers that Nino will do anything to protect her family, and that's how he needs to appeal to her. And that's what he does in the fireworks arc. This concludes part 1 of my quintessential quintuplet breakdown.